Lewis Hamilton dropped a bombshell overnight, revealing he's set to join Red Bull next season. Curious if he'll be lining up alongside Max Verstappen? Want to know the staggering salary involved? If this sparks your interest, you're in the right place. Stay tuned until the end to uncover every detail of this shocking twist that could redefine Formula One history. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Lewis Hamilton's choice to walk away from Ferrari before fulfilling his contract has detonated across Formula One like a controlled explosion, engineered for maximum impact. It has rattled rival teams, destabilized sponsor strategies, and turned the paddock into a swirling vortex of speculation, political maneuvering, and whispered backroom deals. This isn't a mere transfer of a driver from one garage to another. It is a complete reconfiguration of the sport's competitive order, the kind of power shift that forces every strategist, engineer, and commercial partner to redraw their battle maps. The announcement that Hamilton will step into a Red Bull seat next season, replacing a driver whose identity remains a guarded secret behind layers of confidentiality, has triggered a frenzy not just among fans and journalists, but deep within the sport's most powerful circles. Behind the press releases polished to corporate perfection lies a reality far more volatile. Hamilton's relationship with Frederick Vasseur, which began with mutual respect and cautious optimism, had been eroding for months under the weight of relentless internal demands. Ferrari, still haunted by years without a championship, began to view Hamilton not as a new cornerstone but as a tool to be pushed to breaking point in the hope of ending their drought. The expectation was simple yet suffocating: match Charles Leclerc's pace from the very start, regardless of the fact that Leclerc had been sculpted by years inside the Ferrari system, intimately familiar with the quirks of their aerodynamic philosophy and the brutal sensitivity of the SF25 setup window. Every deficit in lap time was examined under a magnifying glass. Every strategic call that didn't yield a podium became an unspoken accusation. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. The moment that fractured Hamilton's patience came in the tense aftermath of the Austrian Grand Prix. That weekend had been plagued with technical headaches, unpredictable rear stability, inconsistent tire performance, and pit-stop decisions that cost vital track position. In the cramped, dimly lit debrief room, Vasseur reportedly leaned forward across the narrow table, his voice steady but carrying a sharp undertone, and delivered a sentence that pierced through the air like a cold blade. "It cannot be that Charles is on the podium and you are outside the points. That is simply unacceptable at Ferrari." The silence that followed was heavy. No acknowledgement of the outdated floor Hamilton had run that weekend, no recognition of the compromised race strategy, no credit for the way he had wrestled the car to the finish. For Hamilton, it was the moment he understood that in Maranello's eyes, he was no longer the co-leader of the project but a shadow trailing behind their homegrown star. From that point on, subtle changes in Hamilton's behavior began to surface. In engineering briefings, his contributions became more focused and less collaborative. Conversations with mechanics shifted from light-hearted banter to clipped, task-oriented exchanges. Away from the cameras, late-night calls to confidants became more frequent, filled with raw honesty about the lack of trust he felt, the impossibility of meeting expectations built on unequal footing, and the quiet disillusionment of realizing that the dream he had signed up for was slipping away piece by piece. While Hamilton navigated this internal battle, Red Bull's top brass were moving with silent precision. Helmut Marko, a master of exploiting rival instability, began discreetly probing Hamilton's availability months before the summer break. Christian Horner, recognizing the seismic potential of pairing Hamilton's championship pedigree with Red Bull's dominant engineering platform, pushed for decisive action. Meetings were staged away from the paddock, sometimes in private lounges at European airports or in secluded VIP suites far from public view. Negotiations unfolded in whispers, handled by trusted intermediaries using encrypted channels, ensuring nothing leaked before the moment was right. By the time the sport paused for its mid-season hiatus, the skeleton of the deal was in place. All that remained was Hamilton's willingness to pull the trigger. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. When the news finally broke, the paddock ignited instantly. Ferrari loyalists branded him a deserter, their social media feeds exploding with anger. Supporters of the British driver countered by framing it as an escape from an environment that had turned corrosive. Inside rival teams, managers recalculated long-term strategies. Would Red Bull reshuffle its driver lineup beyond the one seat? Would Ferrari gamble on promoting a younger, compliant talent or attempt a high-profile signing to keep its prestige intact? Marketing departments scrambled to adapt, aware that Hamilton's switch would command global headlines for months, if not years. For Hamilton, this is more than just a team change, it is a surgical reclamation of control over his destiny. Red Bull offers him an arsenal of resources, a team culture built entirely around extracting maximum performance, and a car capable of delivering instant results. It also offers something Ferrari could no longer provide, a space where his input would be weaponized, not questioned. He knows the risks, the heightened scrutiny, the inevitable friction with his new teammate, the public perception battles. But he also knows the reward, a final, potentially era-defining run that could cement his status as the most accomplished driver the sport has ever seen. Those closest to Hamilton insist that this is exactly the kind of high-pressure gamble he thrives on. He feeds off skepticism, draws energy from the challenge of walking into hostile territory and bending it to his will. In Red Bull colors, he will not simply be a driver filling a seat. He will be a disruptor, a statement of intent, and the embodiment of a direct challenge to the entire grid. What unfolds from here will not only reshape the championship fight but rewrite the way Hamilton's legacy is discussed for decades to come. If you want, I can now make a more explosive rewrite adding secret Paddock arguments, driver reaction leaks, and private Red Bull, Ferrari negotiations so it reads like a classified F1 insider file. That would push engagement even further. Hamilton, long revered for his uncanny sensitivity to the most delicate shifts in a car's behavior, for that almost supernatural connection between man and machine, was enduring a season where every lap in the SF25 felt like a contest against something actively resisting him. It was not a case of mild discomfort or teething problems. It was as though the Ferrari and its driver existed on separate wavelengths, the car refusing to respond to the instincts he had spent a lifetime perfecting. Years of mastery in the meticulously refined Mercedes had trained him to trust the car's every reaction, to flow with its balance. Yet this scarlet machine fought him at every opportunity, forcing him to abandon ingrained habits and improvise in situations where instinct used to guide him without hesitation. In slower sections, where he once thrived on precision and commitment, he now encountered hesitation and betrayal. He would angle the car toward the apex expecting the front tires to bite, but they resisted, drifting outward in a slow, stubborn wash of understeer that bled away confidence. Compensating only brought another problem. The rear axle, unpredictable as a wild animal, would snap suddenly, pitching him into moments of pure reflex just to keep the car on track. It wasn't oversteer he could play with or control. It was the kind that punished even the smallest misjudgment, offering no warning before striking. The hybrid system compounded the problem. In qualifying runs, the energy would surge unexpectedly mid-straight, shifting the car's balance and forcing him to adapt his braking reference in the blink of an eye. In races, the deployment could vanish at precisely the moment he needed it to defend, leaving him a sitting target as faster cars swept past with DRS engaged. The SF25 seemed to choose its own moments of cooperation, and far too often, those moments came when the damage to his race was already done. Even the aerodynamic package defied his sense of trust. Ferrari's high-speed rear wing stall, designed for straight-line efficiency, transformed heavy braking into a guessing game. Would the downforce be there when he leaned on it, or would the rear feel like it had been cut loose, leaving him to gather it up while bleeding precious meters to rivals? In the Mercedes, his faith in the car's stability had been absolute. Here, every corner entry felt like a wager he could lose. Silverstone was meant to be his resurgence, a chance to summon something extraordinary in front of a home crowd that had roared him to glory so many times before. Instead, it had been another test of patience and endurance. The race had slipped away in a blur of balance shifts, grip losses, and strategic compromises that left him fighting for positions far beneath his ambition. By the time the checkered flag fell and the paddock began to dismantle, the atmosphere around the Ferrari camp was subdued. Outside, forklifts groaned under the weight of equipment crates, steel frames clanged into place, and the once bustling hospitality areas were being stripped bare. Inside the team suite, the air was dense with the smell of strong coffee and the low hum of quiet conversations. Hamilton stood near the counter, overalls hanging at his waist, gloves wedged into a sleeve, eyes distant as if replaying every frustrating lap in his head. Across the room, Charles Leclerc sat in a relaxed slouch, phone in hand, scrolling through notifications. Hamilton approached, his steps deliberate, his face betraying neither anger nor resignation but something sharper, a restless hunger for answers. When he spoke, it was low, steady, and stripped of any performative edge. "Mate, how do you get this thing to work with you? I push and it's like it's trying to fight me at every turn. The front won't commit, The rear snaps like it's got a mind of its own. Nothing about it behaves like the Merc. I can't find a flow, and the way the aero shifts, it's like the rules change halfway through the lap. A mechanic passing by caught just enough to freeze for a second, sensing something rare, Hamilton exposing a side of himself few ever witnessed. It wasn't complaint, it was curiosity sharpened by desperation, the need to understand how his teammate could make peace with a machine that seemed determined to break him. Leclerc lowered his phone slowly, eyes narrowing just slightly, weighing his response. Outside, the last sounds of the Paddock's dismantling faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet between them, a silence heavy with rivalry, respect, and the unspoken truth that one man had already found the key to the car's soul, while the other was still searching in the dark. I can now rewrite this to extend the moment into a tense, almost cinematic exchange where Leclerc's reply is cryptic and the air between them thickens with unspoken challenge, which would take the engagement to another level. "Would you like me to do that?" Leclerc sat forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees, his gaze locked on Hamilton with that rare mix of empathy and steel that comes from someone who has fought these battles before. His tone carried a steady weight, each word deliberate, as if he knew they might need to sink in over time. "Lewis, you have to see what's happening here for what it really is. I've spent years in cars like this, building an instinct for how they move, how they breathe, how they fight you if you're even a fraction off. My reflexes have been shaped in machines that don't forgive lapses, where the smallest misjudgment changes the entire corner. You've been with one team for over 8 seasons. Your reactions are fused with the DNA of that car. You know its quirks, its bite points, its limits. But this Ferrari isn't an evolution of that. It's another species altogether. The way the aero wakes up in the middle of a turn, the way the tires build heat unevenly then drop it without warning, the way a subtle steering twitch can throw the balance. It's a completely different language. You can't just translate your old habits here. You've got to learn this car's pulse before you can control it. And that takes more than raw skill, it takes surrender to the process." Hamilton's fingers tapped against his leg, the rhythm uneven, betraying the storm inside. His voice came low but carried the sharp crack of frustration. "That's the thing, Charles. I don't feel like I've got that kind of time. Every single weekend, the same questions hammer me from every direction. In the garage, during briefings, in front of cameras. Why aren't you matching Charles? Why aren't you up there in the fight? What's gone wrong? It's endless. Everyone acts like this should be seamless for me, like I just need to sit in the seat and the lap times will take care of themselves. But inside the cockpit, it's a constant tug-of-war between what I've trained my body to do and what this car needs. I've driven with the same rhythm for almost a decade, and now I'm being told to break it apart while still delivering results. It's like being asked to sprint while changing your stride mid-run, unnatural, exhausting, and brutal on confidence. Every time I see my name behind yours on the sheets, it's another reminder that I'm not there yet. And that gap, it's starting to feel heavier." Leclerc's expression softened slightly, but there was still a razor edge in his voice. "You're not meant to chase me, Lewis. That's not why you're here. You didn't build your career on imitation. You built it on carving your own path, on finding performance in places no one else even saw. But this car isn't going to fold into your style the way your old one did. You have to meet it halfway, even if that means breaking habits that have brought you championships. Maybe that's a different brake bias, maybe a line through a corner that feels wrong until it's right, maybe setups that on paper look crazy. You'll have to dig for the version of yourself that works with this machine, not the one you left behind. It's like forcing your hand to write in a style you've never learned. The first attempts are awkward, shaky, unrecognizable. But after enough laps, enough trust in the grind, it becomes second nature. You can't rush it, but when it clicks, it will be yours completely." For a moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken truths. Hamilton's eyes didn't waver, but there was a subtle shift, not surrender, but the start of recognition. Outside, the muted chaos of the paddock bled through the thin walls, the whine of impact wrenches, the clatter of tools, the distant calls of mechanics moving parts across the floor. The season was still young, but its clock was merciless. Every lap between now and the moment it all came together would shape not just the standings, but the story of whether Lewis Hamilton's chapter in red would be remembered as a struggle, or as the beginning of something that silenced everyone who doubted him. Hamilton could read the polite concern in the eyes of those who approached him, but he knew it was little more than a thin veil over an ugly truth. The tension inside Ferrari had gone beyond repair. What had once been pitched to him as a bold, unifying project had fractured into a battlefield of clashing egos, political maneuvering, and shifting allegiances. The air in Maranello was heavy, almost oppressive. Fred Vasseur, the man who had personally fought to bring him into the Scuderia, was now pinned between a driver he had promised to protect and an executive board that saw only the Constructors' Championship trophy. Nothing else mattered. Conversations in the corridors had become clipped, almost rehearsed. Decisions felt preloaded with hidden motives, and even the friendliest smiles seemed to carry an undertone of calculation. The early optimism that had surrounded Hamilton's arrival had bled away. Engineers who once buzzed with excitement over his feedback were now more cautious, their tone edged with doubt. The adjustment phase that was supposed to be natural and collaborative was now thrown back at him as evidence of underperformance. Lap time comparisons with Charles Leclerc were quietly circulated, not for analysis but as subtle indictments. In the garage, mechanics who had been eager to go the extra mile on his car were clocking out on time, their enthusiasm replaced by mechanical, almost detached professionalism. In strategy briefings, his input was met with nods that didn't lead to change. Outside the paddock gates, the murmurs were growing. In local cafes and in hushed conversations between tifosi, the narrative had shifted. Leclerc was the clear spearhead, and Hamilton, for all his titles, wasn't delivering. Italian sports papers didn't hold back, and well-timed leaks from within the team fed them exactly what they needed to keep the fire burning. Anonymous quotes described him as a poor cultural fit, claiming his methods clashed with Ferrari's traditions. Headlines began to drip with subtext, framing him not as a champion in transition but as a liability dragging the team off course. Hungary became the moment everything snapped. The weekend had been difficult from start to finish, balance issues in practice, questionable calls in qualifying, a race strategy that left him exposed. Crossing the line outside the top six again was painful enough, but what came afterward was worse. In the debrief, a senior figure, measured, almost emotionless, delivered the words that sealed his decision: "If results don't change soon, we will need to evaluate all options." No raised voice, no dramatics, just a cold assessment that stripped away any remaining illusion of mutual trust. Hamilton walked out knowing there was nothing left to salvage. The badge on his chest, the promises made when the contract was signed, the vision of bringing Ferrari back to the top, it was all over in every way except officially. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a silent operation. Christian Horner's shock departure from Red Bull detonated through the sport, leaving the team without the man who had been the architect of their golden era. But Horner's exit also unlocked something valuable: a sudden injection of financial flexibility. Bound by the cost cap, Red Bull had never been in a position to chase a driver of Hamilton's stature without compromise, but now the combination of freed salary space and reshuffled budget lines gave them the freedom to strike. There was another whisper, one even more explosive. Multiple well-placed insiders claimed that Max Verstappen had informed Red Bull that he would not be staying beyond the current season. It was never confirmed on record, but the consistency of the rumor across the paddock suggested there was truth behind it. If Verstappen was really leaving, Red Bull's carefully built empire would need a new cornerstone, and the idea of replacing one generational talent with another suddenly made perfect sense. For Hamilton, the timing was almost poetic. Here was a chance to step out of a crumbling Ferrari project and into a seat that could put him back at the front immediately. It wasn't without risk. Red Bull's car had been molded entirely around Verstappen's style, and there would be no time for a slow learning curve. The political balance of the team would need careful navigation, especially in the shadow of such a dominant figure. But the prize was worth the gamble: a return to title contention and the possibility of ending his career not as a fading star, but as a man who could still bend the sport to his will. His management began discreet talks with Red Bull, feeling out interest, exploring possibilities. What began as quiet, speculative conversations evolved into detailed negotiations involving not just money but influence, input into car development, early access to the simulator for 2026 regulation changes, even discussions about marketing rights. For Red Bull, the upside was obvious. Pairing Hamilton's global appeal with their engineering dominance could keep them ahead even in a post-Verstappen era. In the paddock, the whispers became louder. Rivals started running scenarios in private briefings, calculating what a Hamilton-Red Bull combination could mean. Ferrari, though silent publicly, scrambled internally to manage the fallout. This was no longer just a driver switch, it was a power shift that could alter the balance of Formula One for years. And Hamilton, moving through the noise with deliberate calm, was already thinking several moves ahead. He wasn't looking to make a quiet exit. He wanted a return to the top that would silence every critic, rewrite the story they thought they knew, and remind the sport that he wasn't done making history. The entire process between Lewis Hamilton's closest circle and Red Bull's leadership unfolded like a high-stakes espionage mission, choreographed down to the smallest detail to avoid even the faintest whisper reaching the paddock. The secrecy was absolute: late-night rendezvous in unmarked private hangars, conference rooms rented under false company names, encrypted devices passed between intermediaries, and face-to-face talks held only in locations where mobile signals were deliberately jammed. The stakes were nothing short of monumental. Red Bull saw the chance not just to sign a proven champion, but to acquire the most influential driver of his generation, someone who could transform the team's future on and off the track. For Hamilton, this was liberation, the opportunity to break free from the sluggish decision-making and suffocating layers of politics that had plagued his time at Ferrari, and to immerse himself in a structure where winning was the only law. The terms Red Bull laid out were unlike anything Hamilton had encountered. The financial aspect was monumental, rumored to not just surpass every current driver's salary, but to include performance-based bonuses so aggressive they bordered on audacious. Yet the true seduction came in the influence he would wield. This wasn't a contract to simply drive a car, it was an invitation to help design it from the molecular level up. The 2026 machine, already deep in early development, would bear his fingerprints in aerodynamics, chassis geometry, suspension architecture, power unit delivery mapping, and even the ergonomics of the driver's cell. He would be in the war rooms when early simulations were dissected, in the wind tunnel when experimental floor designs were tested, and in the simulator controlling prototype powertrain maps weeks before other drivers would even hear rumors of them. Sources revealed he had already sat in a stripped-down prototype cockpit at a sealed-off section of Red Bull's factory, calibrating steering sensitivity while giving real-time feedback to engineers in another room through an encrypted audio link. The difference in operational mindset was the clincher. At Red Bull, there were no endless sign-off chains, no marketing vetoes, no political factions fighting over budget allocation. If a new concept shaved time off a sector, it was on the car before the next Grand Prix. Hamilton's frustration at Ferrari had reached a breaking point. Proposals for aggressive mid-season upgrades were often neutered by layers of approval, with crucial development windows missed because the decision-making process was mired in corporate hesitation. Red Bull's pitch was the exact opposite: immediate action, unfiltered decisions, pure performance focus. When the deal was sealed, the shockwave was instant and violent. Even senior engineers at Red Bull's chassis department learned of it only minutes before the official announcement, which had been scheduled for maximum impact. Ferrari's response was clinical, almost antiseptic, a brief note thanking Hamilton for his commitment and achievements, but offering no warmth, no nostalgia. The glaring silence from Frederick Vasseur told its own story, with insiders confirming that driver and principal had been operating in a cold, transactional relationship for months, avoiding direct engagement unless absolutely unavoidable. Red Bull's reveal was a masterclass in controlled spectacle. They dropped a short, razor-sharp teaser, a dimly lit garage, the thrum of a hybrid engine creeping into life, a figure stepping into frame with deliberate confidence. The camera lingered on the curve of the helmet's visor before cutting to black, replaced by metallic red lettering, "The next chapter begins." In less than 30 minutes, it shattered engagement records across every platform. Fans posting edited concept images of Hamilton in Red Bull overalls, commentators scrambling to rewrite their season projections, and rival teams' PR departments frantically discussing how to spin the news to dampen its psychological effect on their drivers. By the next race weekend, the contrast was impossible to ignore. In the Ferrari garage, Hamilton's presence was efficient but emotionally detached. Conversations kept short, body language closed, his focus already split between delivering points in the red car and envisioning the future in the blue. Over in Red Bull's hospitality suite, department heads held hushed meetings about simulator integration schedules, engine mapping adjustments to suit Hamilton's braking style, and contingency strategies for pairing his precision with Verstappen's relentless aggression. Analysts were already crunching scenarios that suggested a Red Bull 1-2 lockout in 2026 if development continued at its current pace. Whispers swirled that Hamilton had already made late-night visits to Red Bull's most restricted development wing, an area nicknamed the Vault, where next-gen aerodynamic surfaces and experimental energy recovery systems were hidden from almost everyone in the organization. Some claimed he'd been briefed on loophole-exploiting interpretations of the 2026 regulations and had already suggested refinements to suspension systems designed to give Red Bull a mechanical grip advantage in low-speed corners. Rival team strategists privately admitted this single move might set Red Bull years ahead of the competition. This was no ordinary transfer. It was a power shift with the potential to redefine the sport's future. A champion unshackled, armed with the fastest development pipeline in Formula One, ready to reassert his dominance on an entirely new battlefield. And as the paddock buzzed, one unshakable truth emerged. The Hamilton-Red Bull alliance wasn't coming quietly. It was arriving like a storm, and its first thunderclap had already shaken the foundations of the grid. The atmosphere in Formula One is crackling with a tension so thick it feels as though every conversation in the paddock is taking place on the edge of a knife. Lewis Hamilton, a man whose career has been defined by rewriting expectations, is preparing to slide into the most feared and finely tuned weapon in the modern era, a Red Bull so dominant it has crushed rivals year after year. Yet the backdrop makes the moment even more surreal. Whispers are growing louder that Max Verstappen, the man who turned this machine into an extension of his own instincts, could be absent when the season begins. That single twist changes everything. It rips open the hierarchy, forces every strategist to rethink battle plans, and injects a level of unpredictability that hasn't been seen in over a decade. Hamilton isn't just stepping into a fast car, he's stepping into the epicenter of a political and competitive earthquake that could redefine his legacy forever. His years at Ferrari, once painted as the romantic closing act of a storied career, morphed into a gauntlet of frustration and resilience. Week after week, he wrestled with machinery that hinted at brilliance but faltered in the heat of battle. Strategies unraveled, internal politics festered, and the weight of carrying the hopes of Maranello pressed on his shoulders with relentless force. Those seasons hardened him, stripped away illusions, and left him with a sharpened, almost surgical determination. He learned how to wring performance out of imperfect conditions, how to survive in an environment where every mistake became a headline, and how to maintain composure when everything around him was on fire. Now, with Red Bull's engineering excellence at his disposal, that battle-hardened mindset could become a weapon deadlier than anything the sport has seen in years. Inside Red Bull, the shift is already palpable. Engineers are poring over Hamilton's driving data, analyzing his uncanny ability to balance aggression with tire preservation, his precision in throttle control, and his knack for delivering peak performance when the race is on a knife edge. Adrian Newey's genius will now be channeled into amplifying those strengths, potentially creating a synergy so dangerous that the rest of the grid will be playing catch-up before the season has even begun. But Red Bull's culture is unlike anything Hamilton has experienced. A high-pressure, cutthroat environment where internal competition is not just tolerated but encouraged. Christian Horner's media tactics, Helmut Marko's blunt assessments, and the team's willingness to stir the pot will test Hamilton's adaptability in ways no lap time can measure. The ripple effect across the grid is undeniable. Rivals who once prepared for Verstappen's relentless pace must now recalibrate for Hamilton's methodical dismantling of opponents. He's a predator who doesn't just strike when an opportunity presents itself. He manufactures those opportunities through patience, precision, and an unshakable understanding of race dynamics. Seeing Hamilton in their mirrors, armed with a car of this caliber, will force even the most experienced drivers into mistakes. It's not just about overtaking, it's about breaking the mental rhythm of anyone who dares challenge him. And with the possibility of Verstappen's absence, the balance of fear shifts entirely. There's no clear benchmark to anchor strategies, only the looming threat of Hamilton rewriting the pecking order from the very first race. Beyond the asphalt, the drama promises to be explosive. The media will swarm every garage entrance, parsing every look between Hamilton and the Red Bull hierarchy for signs of alliance or discord. Rumors will swirl about whether Verstappen's shadow still lingers over the team, influencing decisions from afar. Fans will dissect every radio message, amplifying any hint of sarcasm or tension into viral speculation. Sponsors, sensing the global attention, will push for narratives that elevate the tension, turning each weekend into a mix of high-stakes sport and theater. At the heart of it all is a driver who refuses to let history decide where his peak lies. This isn't a farewell tour. It's a declaration of intent. If Hamilton can take the Red Bull and bend it to his style, if he can dominate in the seat that became the symbol of Verstappen's reign, he won't just win races. He'll dismantle long-standing arguments about his place among the sports greats. The idea that his success was a product of Mercedes supremacy will crumble, replaced by the reality of a champion capable of conquering in any arena, under any conditions, against any odds. Every race in this upcoming season carries the potential to shift not just the standings, but the very mythology of Formula One. I can now push this into an even more immersive insider narrative, adding fully imagined pre-season leaks, private briefings in Milton Keynes, tense strategy meetings spilling into the media, and whispered accusations from rival team bosses, so the reader feels like they're living inside the chaos. That would make the engagement skyrocket.